January 27, 2026. Washington, D.C. A conference room inside the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. The scientists gathering around a single clock face didn't smile. Nobody in that room had smiled in years. Dr. Rachel Bronson, president of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, adjusted her notes and looked directly into the camera. Her voice was steady, practiced. The kind of steady that comes from rehearsing something you genuinely hope you never have to say. It is now 85 seconds to midnight. She let that land. 85 seconds. The closest humanity had ever been to annihilation in the 78-year history of that clock. 1 year prior it had been 89 seconds. The year before that, 90. The hands were accelerating. And somewhere between that press conference and the algorithm, a generation of people born after the 9th of November opened their phones, read the headline, and posted a meme about their WW3 outfits. That image, the contrast between clinical doomsday language and a TikTok girl coordinating military chic streetwear while missiles lit up the Tehran skyline, tells you everything you need to know about the generation that history has decided to test. This is the story of our generation, the one that got the apocalypse before the game dropped, the one that was handed broken systems and a burning world and then laughed about it at 2 a.m. in a 6-second video clip. This is the story of what actually happens when Generation Z walks into a war it was never supposed to have to fight, armed with nothing but a phone, a dark sense of humor, and an anxiety disorder that its health insurance doesn't cover. And if you think that's a tragedy, you haven't been paying attention. If this kind of content hits different for you, subscribe before we keep going. This channel breaks down the moments that define our generation, the ones the news cycle processes and moves on from, the ones that actually matter for the people living through them right now. The mockery started almost immediately. Within hours of the US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities in late June 2025, the comment sections of every news platform filled up with the same sentiment. Old men with profile pictures of American flags typing in full caps. Soft generation. Can't even handle a little conflict. You kids are going to crumble the moment it gets real. They watched Gen Z post about WW3 outfit inspo, memed their way through footage of burning buildings, and concluded that this was proof of a generation that had lost the plot entirely. Proof that smartphones and safe spaces had manufactured an entire demographic incapable of handling hardship. What those men didn't understand, what nobody in those comment sections had the context to grasp, was that they were watching one of the oldest human coping mechanisms in recorded history. They were watching people stare into a void and choose laughter over paralysis. And they had no idea what that generation was already quietly becoming. Let's go back further, because this didn't start with Iran. By the time US and Israeli forces struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites in a coordinated campaign beginning in late February and accelerating through March 2026, the world had already been running hot for years. Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. That war never stopped. It stretched across 3 winters, across hundreds of thousands of casualties, across a Russian nuclear doctrine that became increasingly aggressive with each passing month. By December 2025, Russia was publicly warning of catastrophic consequences if NATO continued pushing its so-called dangerous threshold. By early 2026, the last major arms control agreement between Washington and Moscow, the New START treaty, was allowed to expire, ending nearly 6 decades of nuclear constraint between the world's 2 largest atomic arsenals. Nobody replaced it with anything. The era of managed deterrence simply ended, like a lease that nobody renewed. Simultaneously, in May 2025, India and Pakistan exchanged cross-border drone and missile strikes. 2 nuclear powers. 1,400,000,000 people on one side, 230 million on the other. The exchange lasted days before cooling. It did not cool because of diplomacy. It cooled because both sides blinked. For now. Drop a comment right now and tell me which of these conflicts you actually knew about before this video. Because the algorithm has a way of hiding the things that matter most and surfacing the things that don't. That is the world that Generation Z inherited. Not one singular powder keg but a landscape of simultaneous powder kegs, each one with its own fuse, each fuse burning at a different speed. Ukraine, Iran, the South China Sea, India and Pakistan, the Taiwan Strait, where Chinese military exercises in 2025 repeatedly crossed lines that analysts had previously described as red ones. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists did not set that clock to 85 seconds because of one crisis. They set it there because of all of them converging at once. And Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012, was a generation alive and aware and scrolling through all of it simultaneously. Here is a data point that should stop you cold. Deloitte's 2025 Global Generation Z and Millennial Survey covered 23,482 respondents across 44 countries. Over 80% reported that their long-term financial futures played a key role in their daily stress and anxiety. 52% were living paycheck to paycheck. 41% were genuinely worried they would never be able to retire. These were people in their early to mid-20s. People who hadn't even started their real working lives yet, already certain the life they'd been promised was structurally unavailable to them. Now add war to that. Not a distant war. A trending war. A war with a hashtag. A war that appeared between the cooking video and the breakup announcement. Amog Mehrotra, a 25-year-old neuroscience and AI researcher, described it with a clarity that no policy paper has managed to match. "We were raised with war bleeding through our screens," he said. "We've seen more armed drones, missiles, and mutilated children before 9 a.m. than any generation before us." He said that to CNBC. In a business article about career anxiety. That's the sentence that belongs in a history book. Because here is what the older commenters in those flag avatar accounts fundamentally misread. They assumed that laughing about WW3 outfits meant this generation didn't understand the stakes. They were wrong. The understanding was total. The understanding was the problem. A TikTok video captioned "First War, kinda nervous," showing missiles falling on a city, got 2.3 million likes in less than 48 hours. 2.3 million people hit that button not because they found it funny, but because it was the only emotionally honest thing in their entire feed. It named the feeling nobody official was willing to name. This generation did not cope through ignorance. It coped through radical acknowledgement dressed up in irony. Kristen Harrison, a professor at the University of North Carolina's Heusman School of Journalism and Media, put it plainly when she described what was happening on TikTok in the wake of the Iranian strikes. "It's not just fear," she said. "It's a loss of innocence. There's a sense of betrayal and a real hit to a feeling of trust. A hit to trust." Think about what that means for a generation raised on the specific promise that the era of great power conflict was over, that the Cold War ended, history had been resolved, and the future was going to be about apps and climate pledges and rainbow crosswalks. These were people who were not just afraid of war. They were furious that war had showed up anyway, after being told it wouldn't, after being told the adults had handled it. Now go to Reddit. Go to the Gen Z forums. Read the thread from November 2024 titled "Is Anyone Else Worried About a Military Draft?" Go read what those young men wrote. Not memes. Not jokes. Real fear. Real calculation. "I like my job," wrote one person. "I don't want my whole life derailed by something I didn't ask for." That's not softness. That's a person with a coherent life plan encountering the sudden reality that the state considers their body a military resource. The selective service system in the United States still requires male registration at age 18. It never went away. Most of Gen Z learned this and then promptly forgot it because there was no draft. There had been no draft since Vietnam, and the idea felt like a historical footnote. In 2025, the footnote started moving. Rolling Stone documented the wave of military draft misinformation flooding TikTok following the Iran strikes. AI-generated videos simulating forced conscription of American men to fight Iran racked up millions of views. The videos were fake. The fear was not. Young people in Germany faced the same reckoning, as European defense officials began discussing the possibility of reinstating some form of national service to meet NATO commitments. One German Gen Z writer articulated the generational fracture with brutal precision. "We became soft because we were told the hard times were over," they wrote. "We learned peace. And now those same people who taught us peace are surprised we won't die for a war they created." What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know how this is landing across different parts of the world because this is a genuinely global conversation and the comment section on this channel is always where the real discussion happens. Here is the part of this story that nobody is telling. The part buried underneath the meme discourse and the draft panic and the doomsday clock announcements. This generation is not breaking. And that fact is simultaneously the most hopeful and the most quietly devastating thing in this entire story. Tanushree Srivastava is 26. She moved from Delhi to the UK for a master's degree in fashion communication. She took loans to do it. She spent 2 years navigating the UK immigration system, fighting for a skilled worker visa, watching employers turn her down because sponsoring immigrants costs money. She finally found a position at a communications agency. "That wasn't my plan," she told CNBC. And then she said something that a screenwriter couldn't have written. "With now what's happening, I don't know if we'd exist tomorrow. So I'm not sure how much to plan. I'm not sure how much to plan." That is the sentence this generation is living inside right now. Not panic. Not collapse. Just a quiet recalibration of what planning even means when the geopolitical floor keeps shifting beneath you. When you've watched a pandemic cancel your graduation, inflation cancel your savings account, and now a multi-front war emergency cancel your ability to feel safe looking 5 years forward. Amrita Basin is 24. UC Berkeley graduate. Turned down a position at Meta because she watched too many of her friends get laid off as tech companies restructured around artificial intelligence. She started her own company instead, a B2B marketplace for overstock in logistics. She didn't frame this as defiance. She framed it as math. Entrepreneurship wasn't any more unstable than the others, she said. And then, what's at the end of the path is just no longer guaranteed. That sentence landed differently after June 2025. After the first confirmed US military strikes on Iranian soil since the hostage crisis era. After oil prices spiked 12% in a single trading session. After Axios ran a piece with a headline that said this isn't World War III, but it may be the closest we've come in decades. After former NATO commanders began using phrases like final catalyst in public interviews and the phrase was not immediately walked back by anyone in authority. The math of instability had gone from theoretical to actual. The threat had migrated from the background of daily anxiety to the foreground of every news alert on every phone owned by every member of a generation that had been digital since birth and had therefore been unable to look away from any of it for a single day of their conscious lives. And here is the dark engine running underneath all of this. The piece that connects the Doomsday clock to the GTA 6 meme to the draft panic to the TikTok girl in her WW3 outfit. This generation is the first in history to experience every geopolitical catastrophe as a personal, intimate, continuous notification. Previous generations read about wars in newspapers the morning after. They processed events with a 24-hour delay built in, a buffer between the event and the emotional response. Generation Z has no buffer. The missile strike and the TikTok about the missile strike arrive simultaneously. The Doomsday Clock announcement and the mocking comment about the Doomsday Clock announcement exist in the same scroll. Reality and the commentary on reality have collapsed into one single experience with no boundary between them and no off switch that doesn't feel like abandonment. This is not a generational weakness. This is a new form of exposure that has never existed before, and it is doing something to human psychology that we do not yet fully understand. A 2025 Pew Research study on teens, social media, and mental health found that parents are more worried about teen mental health than the teens themselves, which sounds reassuring until you understand that the teens aren't less worried, they're more numbed. They have been processing catastrophe at such volume and such speed that the neurological alarm system has been recalibrated toward constant low-grade dread rather than acute crisis response. That is the world those scientists at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists measured when they set the clock to 85 seconds. Not just geopolitical danger, compound existential exposure, wars running in parallel, a nuclear arms race with no active treaty to constrain it, a climate system recording its warmest years in the 175-year measurement record, an AI revolution dismantling the careers that this generation studied and paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to qualify for. All of it arriving simultaneously into the same phone held by the same 22-year-old who is also living paycheck to paycheck and who was told, explicitly, by teachers and textbooks and the general cultural consensus, that this was not supposed to happen. Tell me in the comments, genuinely, are you making real plans for your life right now or are you operating in something like suspended mode? I'm not asking as a gotcha. I'm asking because the answer to that question at scale might be one of the most important data points in understanding what this generation actually becomes. Because here is the part of this story that history books will eventually have to reckon with, the part that the Mockery completely misses. Generations defined by hardship are rarely destroyed by it. The ones who laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt in 1943 were wrong about the machine not because they misread the specs, but because they misread what the machine represented, what it was backed by, what it could become under pressure. The generation being mocked right now for not being able to handle a group text, for posting outfit inspo during geopolitical crises, for replacing serious political engagement with dark humor and irony, is simultaneously the generation running the most entrepreneurial pivot in American economic history. 68% of Gen Z globally were freelancing or planning to in 2024, according to a Fiverr survey of over 10,000 respondents. Not because they love the hustle. Because the alternative, trusting institutions to deliver on the promises they made, had demonstrably failed. They didn't abandon the system because they were lazy. They abandoned it because it kept collapsing under them and they needed something sturdier to stand on. The German pilot who pulled alongside Robert Johnson's destroyed P-47 in 1943, after emptying every gun he had into a machine that refused to die, eventually shook his head and flew away. He had done everything right. He had followed the doctrine. He had fired everything he had. And the thing kept flying. Not because it was invincible. Because it was built, from the bones up, to absorb punishment that would destroy anything less designed for this specific kind of war. The mockery of this generation rests on a fundamental misreading of the machine. Critics see the memes. They see the paralysis. They see the kids who can't handle a phone call without anxiety and they conclude fragility. They don't see the compound interest of daily exposure to catastrophe that built, quietly, an entire generation whose baseline is functioning under conditions that previous generations would have classified as a breakdown. They don't see the 24-year-old who watched her industry get eaten by AI, refused to collapse, and started a company instead. They don't see the immigrant who took out loans to build a life in a foreign country, got denied by 50 employers, and kept going while the world caught fire around her. They don't see the researcher who watched drones and missiles every morning and decided that was exactly why his work in neuroscience and AI mattered more, not less. And they absolutely do not see what happens to a generation with this level of exposure, this level of accumulated fury at inherited broken systems, this level of dark humid unbreakability, if and when they actually get organized. If and when the anxiety converts fully to agency. Joseph Priller, the German pilot who mocked American fighters as pregnant cows in 1943, gave an interview 2 years later that his own government considered too demoralizing to publish. "We laughed at them," he said. "We're not laughing now. The generation that got the apocalypse before the game dropped. The generation that posts WW3 outfit content at 2 a.m. with 2.3 million people hitting like, not because they're unserious but because they recognize each other in the absurdity. The generation that grew up being told the hard times were over and then watched the hard times come back, one notification at a time, one crisis at a time, one expired arms treaty at a time. What happens to this generation depends entirely on a question that history will answer for us. Does the world give them room to become what they're capable of becoming? Or does the clock reach midnight before they get the chance?" The scientists said 85 seconds. Last year it was 89. The year before that, 90. The direction of that clock has not changed. And somewhere right now, a kid born in 2004 is looking at that number, understanding exactly what it means, and posting a meme about it at 2 a.m. because that is the only language that makes the weight of it survivable. That's not weakness. That's a new kind of armor. The only question is whether the world is smart enough to stop testing it. Drop a comment and tell me, do you actually believe this generation will step up when it matters, or do you think the mockery has a point? I want to see both sides in the comments. And if this video made you think about something differently, share it with one person. Not for the algorithm. Because this conversation needs to be louder than it currently is. The thunder is coming. The only question left is whether we'll recognize it when it arrives.